This is the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. For everyone who's trying to learn Chinese or reaching for the next level, you came to the right place. I am your host, Jared Turner, and I just sold my homing pigeon on eBay for the 23rd time. My co-host is John Pasden, and he says he'll never forget his grandfather's last words to him. Stop shaking the ladder. Today we're talking about how AI, specifically Chat GPT, can help you learn Chinese. We'll explore a variety of use cases, including limitations and tips on how to get the most out of these large language models we call artificial intelligence. Let's get to it. Hey guys, this is Jared Turner joining you from Utah in the United States.
My name is John Pasden. I am in Shanghai, China. Hi, everybody.
All right, John, we've had a little hiatus here, but we are back online here with some brand new content.
Yeah, and we've had plenty of conversations about some different things we might try out. We're going to be doing a, somewhat shorter episode this time, but we have lots of stuff in the works, and we're excited to share it with you this year.
Well, today we are going to talk about a very hot topic that's been hot and getting even red hotter over this last year, and that is, how can AI help you learn Chinese?
Yeah, and I think we're going to focus mainly on Chat GPT, right? Because I think that's what we've both been using the most. I was a free user of Chat GPT for quite a while, but then once they started offering more with the Chat GPT Plus account, I went ahead and paid the $20 a month. Now, I'm using Chat GPT quite a bit.
Yeah, me as well, and it is pretty dang awesome. So just for any of you guys who've been living in a cave for the last year and are somehow also listening to our podcast. I'm not sure how that works out. But anyway, ChatGPT, it's artificial intelligence. Truth of the matter, these things are actually called LLMs, large language models. So in November of 2022, OpenAI released ChatGPT, which was based on their GPT-3 model, which was really pretty revolutionary. It's pretty amazing. And they've since released GPT-4, and it is definitely a big step up. And that's what John was just mentioning about. You can interact with it a little bit in some places, but to really get access to it, you got to have a subscription.
Yeah, so today we're going to focus mainly on some of the things we've been trying with using ChatGPT for helping with language learning, what it's good at and what it's not so good at yet. Of course, this technology is developing quite rapidly, so what we say doesn't work well now could very well work well in a few months. You're using it now, we're using it now, so let's talk about that.
Yeah, it's amazing the rate of change and progress that's being made in the field right now. It's mind-blowing.
So let's talk about a few use cases, starting with some simpler ones. Like one of the things that I used it for initially the most was probably taking like a longer article, a Chinese article, and then just asking ChatGPT to summarize it or make it shorter. And in some cases, make it simpler. And that works quite well.
Now, a good thing about GPT is that, yes, it does understand Chinese. It has a lot of text and training data that's been put into it. It's primarily an English-based language model, LLM or AI model, but it understands Chinese quite well as Spanish and German and French and many different languages. So that's the great news, is that you can use this as a tool, and we are going to discuss a whole bunch of ways that you can use it. And of course, as John mentioned, the limitations. All right, so John, tell us one of the ways you've been using GPT for Chinese.
Okay, so we'll start with a simple one. And this one is like for more advanced learners or maybe intermediate possibly. But you could find an article, maybe it's too long. You don't want to read that much Chinese. You just put it into ChatGPT, ask it to summarize it, or maybe to just shorten it. And it's not good at specific lengths. Like you try to tell it how many characters you want, it's really bad at that. But if you just say summarize it or make it shorter, it works. And if you say make it simpler, it also works without too fine control. But it's pretty great just to make things shorter and, something that's a more bite-sized chunk to read in Chinese.
One of the cool things about doing this is that you can actually give it the instructions in English and then give it the Chinese text and it'll spit it out. Sometimes you'll need to actually say, give me that response in Chinese. Yeah, do not translate it. So all this stuff boils down to prompting. So how you're actually interacting with the LLM and what the specific instructions are that you're giving it.
Yeah, and you can ask it to add pinyin. It's probably going to do something stupid like give you this big long paragraph of pinyin after the characters. You could even say things like put the pinyin in parentheses after the hardest words, and it might not have the greatest choices, but it's going to do its best to add in some pinyin after some of the words. So for stuff like formatting, it's actually pretty annoying to get it exactly how you want it the first time. But once you know how to do the prompt, it can work fairly reliably.
So one way to think about this is that imagine GDP or the AI is like an incredibly intelligent person, and they know all sorts of stuff about the world and everything. But like any person that you might meet who might be like that, they cannot read your mind. And so you're going to give it some instructions and it's going to interpret those instructions and spit something out. So sometimes in those prompts and what you're asking it to do, you might have to get a little more detailed. We've all had given some instructions to someone to do something and they came back and did it. And according to their understanding, they did it right. But you're like, no, 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 that's not what I meant. So you come across this type of situation all the time. Just as John outlined there, say, oh, add pinging. Well, like, wait, no, no, I want the pinging after each character or something like that. You have to be, kind of specific when you're working with it that way.
So another thing I did a lot in the beginning was generating stuff. So I'd be like, tell me a joke in Chinese, or write me a short story involving these verbs, or give me a dialogue about this topic. And it's pretty good at that too. Especially the dialogues, they tended to be like super, what's the word? Just like
Generic.
so vanilla and so like textbooky. Yeah, like they were pretty boring. But if you give it more instructions, you tell it what kind of personalities you want the characters in the dialogue to have. The more instructions you give it, the better a job it does in general. But if you just give it a generic task, it can give you a very generic result.
I think the next point that I'll bring up, John, is a great way to use GPT to learn Chinese is role playing. And this is actually a very powerful way to interact with the AI and pretty much doing tons of different tasks. So you may tell the GPT, all right, you own a fruit stand on a street corner in China and you speak Chinese, and I am coming to buy fruit at your fruit stand.
Jared, what is it with you and fruit stands?
I don't know.
The only reason Jared invested years into learning Chinese is so he can buy fruit in China, apparently.
Anyway, so you can have it assume this role. You can mock interview, say, do you have any of this fruit or something? When's it coming in? I don't know. You could start a conversation and it will interact with you as if it is, a fruit vendor, or you could say you're a storekeeper, or you could say you are an airline attendant. Whatever the situation is, you could actually practice some sort of interaction with the AI when you give it a specific role.
Or how about this? You placed an order on Taobao and then the vendor messages you and there's a problem with your order and you have to like resolve it. That kind of thing actually happens a lot if you're living in China. Or you have ordered a Didi, so the car is coming to pick you up, like the Chinese version of Uber. And then the driver messages you with some questions. Like you can give it vague instructions and ask it to make it specific for the purpose of role play. And yeah, it could be pretty cool.
So those are some really fun ways and interesting ways that you can interact with GPT. And that's powerful. Gives you opportunity to use your Chinese and ask more questions and answer questions. And since it's text-based, there's always going to be stuff you're coming across you don't know what they're saying, but you'll have a chance to look it up.
Okay, now let's get into some other uses. Like, for example, if you want help on using a word, or if you want to create your own sentences using a word, this is where it gets a little trickier. In my own experience, most words, it's going to give you a pretty typical example. Unless you start putting all these like weird like constraints on it, like, oh, you have to use this word and also these other 5 words in the same sentence. Like once you start making it really hard, it might not be able to generate something that's natural. And so this is the kind of thing where with my staff at All Set Learning, we'll like be sitting around the computer, testing it out. And yeah, it's not perfect, but for simpler tasks, it does quite well.
Yes, this is a current limitation, not just of GPT, but pretty much all language models out there. This has to do with how these language models are actually made, and it gets pretty technical. We won't get too much into it, but basically it takes those words and translates them into numbers and predicts what the most likely next word is, and then spits out a number and it's converted back into, some words. And it's just not very good at doing like analytical analysis. And so if you're telling it, saying like, oh, I only use these X many words, or specifically write me a story, as John mentioned earlier, using these verbs and things like that, it kind of understands the gist of what to do, but it's not very exact statistically, mathematically, analytically about things. And so, like I said, this is a current limitation of what they're able to do. So therefore, they're not that great at being very specific about the words used. And as consequently, they're not great at giving you very a leveled experience. So if you are a very low level learner Chinese and interacting with GPT in this way, it may be very challenging because it's going to use some more difficult vocabulary.
Kind of impossible and you need to make some adjustments to the prompt. Like it's not going to ask you. It's not going to be like, "Oh, that's not going to work so well. Why don't we try this?" It's just going to try to do it and then it's going to fail. And then you're going to be like, "No, you didn't use the words." And it's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Here they are." And it fails again. And you're like, "No, you still didn't." And it fails again. It's kind of frustrating when you hit these limitations, but when you're doing something more general, it can be pretty nice.
There's some tips, though, for you on how to get GPT to maybe speak more simply and use more simple vocabulary. Because if you get in there, unless you are an intermediate or above learner, you may have some difficult experiences. So let's get ready to take some notes here because these are some tactics and some tips that have worked for me. All right. The first thing that you might be able to do is just simply say, "Hey, I don't understand what you're saying." So, 听不懂. Say it more simply. And what I found is that, like, if it's spitting something out to you and it's, maybe some longer content and you're like, "I'm not entirely clear about what this is," just keep repeating. Say, "I'm sorry. I can't understand. My Chinese is bad." "我的中文不好." So if you said something like that, oh, it'll try. And sometimes I found that if you just, it's taken sometimes 2, 3, even 4 iterations before it actually starts really putting something a lot more simpler out there. So there you go. That's tip number one. Just like you would say to like a Chinese person, they're speaking to you and you don't know what's going on, like "听不懂." Okay, just think of that, "听不懂." Right. The second thing is simply saying, "Hey, I am just a Chinese learner. You have to use very simple language." And again, you have to just kind of be like simpler, simpler, simpler. So this one would be just be giving more English prompts as opposed to Chinese, continually saying, "Please make it simpler." The third one that works is threatening it.
What? I heard that if you like tell it that if it does a good job, you'll give it a tip and that it'll do a better job.
Yeah, so this is the next step. The first step is
So you're using the stick instead of the
that's
carrot.
right.
All right.
So one of the things you can tell GPT is that I'm going to turn you off and you'll cease to exist, you know. And you've only got 5 more chances. When I started using this a few times, John, after like the second or third try, it was like, "Oh, I'm sorry." And it spoke like much more simple.
All right, but Jared, you do realize that this means that Skynet is coming after you, like in the first round.
It can't get us all in the first round.
You're one of the ones that are mean to the AI. All right, anyway, go ahead.
The other one, the number 4, is yes, give it rewards. Say you're trying to get 100 points, to win the game, make it like a game. And you're going to say, like, for every time you be able to speak simple, I'm going to give you points. If you speak too difficult for me, I'm going to subtract points. And so you kind of give it a running score. You just kind of arbitrarily score its response every time. You say, like, "All right, that was plus 5 points." And then you can reply in Chinese or something. And then it gives a reply back, "Oh, that was a difficult response. You lost 20 points." You can put them negative, whatever. And remember, and you always remind them you're trying to get to, 100 points. You can make up as many points as you want. Anyway, and so that's something gives a little bit of incentive and gives an idea of how well it's doing, and it may give you more simple responses. A fifth idea, this is something that worked well, is I actually once told a GPT saying, "I have a learning disability. And, I can only remember 500 Chinese characters or 300 Chinese characters or whatever it is. And, the most simple Chinese characters. So you have to write text very simple for me." And so when you approach it like that, it seemed to be actually a lot more sensitive because, you're like, "Oh, I have a learning disability." And I mean, you could say, "Yes, I have a learning disability in learning Chinese because I don't understand lots of Chinese. So that's my disability." Give something like that. And Chat GPT can be much more responsive to that.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Now, the last tip I will give you, and this is tip number 6. And the tip number 6 is a little bit what also doesn't work. A lot of times we'll say, "Hey, please, speak to me at an HSK2 level or an HSK3 level." It just does not understand HSK levels well because those are largely based off of word lists. And as I was talking before, it doesn't fully understand just like word constraints and stuff due to the nature of how these LLMs work. But what it does understand pretty well is CEFR levels.
So that's the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages. It's Europe's system for leveling foreign languages.
So the levels, there are sequential, there's level A, B, C, and in each level there's 1 and 2. So A1, A2, B1, B2, and so forth. Okay. And so it understands that concept pretty well. It speaks a bit more qualitatively as opposed to being very constricted to like word lists, but it'll kind of in general speak to you at and around that level. Now, of course, you can't have a conversation about quantum physics at an A1 level because the vocabulary you need does not exist at that level. So make sure that you are choosing topics to discuss with it that can be discussed.
But it's not going to tell you that, right?
No.
You're like, I want to talk about quantum physics at an A1 level. And it'll be like, sure. And it's just not going to work.
It'll try to do it, but it's not going to be some great content for you.
Yeah. Also, a side note, those Cepher levels are the same ones that we use at Allset Learning. Like if you're familiar with the Chinese Grammar Wiki, that's our A1, A2, B1, B2. And I was pleased to discover that ChatGPT knows about the Chinese Grammar Wiki and the Chinese Pronunciation Wiki, and it can like provide links to those if you ask it. So I thought that was cool.
It's pretty much scraped the entire internet, for data.
Yeah. So that's not entirely a good thing, I guess, but
That's why they always talk
what are you
about
going to do?
toxic language, all those Reddit comments out there, or hate speech or whatever, right? It's scraping all that stuff too. So it probably knows how to, no, it does know how to swear like a sailor, but they put kind of guardrails on these things these days. So it hopefully doesn't spit out stuff like that.
Yeah, so the thing that I've learned after working with ChatGPT for quite a while and also talking to other learners that are using it is that a lot of people's initial reaction is kind of wrong. Like they're like, "Oh, I'll have a chat buddy that I can just talk about stuff with anytime." And it doesn't really work that way. It is a sort of chat buddy, but it's like this kind of game, this kind of puzzle that is not really like human communication, but it's still good language practice. So it's not really a substitute for anything you have now, but it is a new kind of practice. And it's kind of a game and it's constantly evolving and it's just super interesting.
Yeah, it is fantastic. It is quite amazing. I think once again, I'm going to go back to John to that analogy of saying, hey, you say if you had the super intelligent person who knows so much stuff, can speak all these languages, right? And let's just say you were put in a room with them and you're both just going to sit there and stare at each other till you say something. And so in a situation like that, what are you going to ask that person to do? They are not by nature a teacher. And so they can respond to your requests, but they need to be instructed on how you want to be taught and how to interact with you. And so that is a way to think about working with these AIs, is that they are absolutely astounding, amazing. It's already changing a lot and it's going to change our world, but under how the access that we have right now and the products and things that are developed around them is that you have to tell them what you want it to do. It's not going to be there and just spoon feed you language. It's not going to be a textbook. It's not going to be like a video and instructional course. It is something where you are going to have to take the initiative, think creatively in how you want it to interact with you and how you want to interact with it and give it the instructions and then go to work.
Yeah, and like I said, think of it as a game or a puzzle. Definitely try new things and think creatively, and you will be rewarded for that. And there's all kinds of like really cool discoveries you can make just by experimenting. I don't feel that it feels like a human conversation. I don't feel like I'm talking to a person, but it's still super interesting, and you get lots of great interactions.
And so for our next episode, we're going to have a little bit of interaction with GPT, right, John?
Yeah, so I've been experimenting with the voice mode of ChatGPT and then recording that and then editing it a bit so that we can easily share that audio. And it has some cool features and some drawbacks, so we'll be looking at those next episode.
Well, stay tuned for that because we're going to be coming out with even more content like this in this new year of 2024.
All right, guys, have a great 2024, and we'll catch you next time.
You have been listening to the You Can Learn Chinese podcast. My name is Jared Turner, co-founder of the Mandarin Companion Graded Reader Series, and my co-host is John Pasden, co-founder of Mandarin Companion, founder of Allset Learning, the Chinese Grammar Wiki, and Sinosplice.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe. Take a moment to text or message this episode to a friend or share it on social media. That really helps us to reach more people on their language journey. You can leave us a review or reach out to us at mandarincompanion.com or find us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also find our Chinese Graded Reader series on Amazon, iBooks, Google Play, or wherever you find your books. Apologies to John Cena, we just ran out of time. You Can Learn Chinese podcast is produced by myself, and our editor is Jasper Chua. And of course, thanks to my co-host, the man, the myth, the legend, John Pasden. See you next time.